Welcome to the Growth Leaders Podcast. Today, we're excited to have a distinguished guest with us who has made a remarkable impact in product design and leadership. With over 20 years of experience, he has successfully navigated the dynamic world of early-stage startups to hyper-growth tech companies and now leads design at Snowflake. As the head of product design at Snowflake, he expertly blends human-centered and data-driven approaches to create innovative user experiences. His leadership is rooted in fostering creativity, diversity, and inclusion, empowering his team to deliver outstanding work. Having shaped products for some of the world's top brands and navigated various growth stages, his journey is a testament to vision, resilience, and excellence. Join us as we explore the inspiring stories and valuable insights of Zack Gottlieb. Get ready to uncover the secrets of effective leadership and innovation in product design. Please welcome Zack Gottlieb.
Hi, Peter. Thanks so much for having me. Super excited about today.
It's great having you here. So, I just said we should have a soft start today here. So, I think you and I have a few things in common. One thing is that we like and love our work, but we also have a hell lot of hobbies and that side on, what are you up to, or what have you been up to, and so on. I mean, what's your, when you don't do your daily stuff?
Yeah. How do I decompress? Decompression is super important in this type of role. I have a number of hobbies. I think there's some longer term ones. I play guitar. I've been playing guitar for 30 plus years. Not well, but it's something I'm super passionate about. And one of the reasons is you can never be great at it. Even the greats are constantly chipping away and trying to get better at something. And every time you pick up the guitar, it's something new you can be learning. The other side of that is I build guitars. I got into that maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I actually built a shop in my backyard during the pandemic. And the beauty of that is, especially in product design that's digital, everything we do is ephemeral now. It's saved over in a week or two. And you can make lots of mistakes. And it's just something you can do fast, and it's you don't have to be as intentional about it, right? You can always just Command Z it and undo what you just did. With things like woodwork, with things like building guitars, the electronics, you have to be very intentional. And it's not about one big choice. It's about a number of choices that you make along the way. And being very careful and taking your time, because that's what the true masters do. When they master their craft, they're slow and intentional, and they really focus on it. And there's a real zen to it that I like, because you're not working in the digital, but at least my thought is, long after I'm gone, those artifacts will exist. Hopefully for my kids, and maybe they'll be passed on to their kids. But so those are a few of my hobbies. I'm also a big avid bike rider, and getting out and that's a good way of clearing their mind. So those are the few things I do to try to stay grounded.
You have some beautiful rides just north of San Francisco, and going out the weekends, of course, in the evenings and so on.
Yeah,
and you're not using technology building guitars. I think of 3D, etc. Which, of course, from a design perspective, could be quite interesting to work. Or
I think that to get really good at something, you kind of have to start at the beginning and understand how the process, and then I think you can jump to the next stage of using tools, digital tools, or computer-aided tools to replicate that. But I think everything I've ever done across my entire career is always about getting my hands really dirty first to learn about stuff and to figure it out, and then you start to apply the other things. So that's kind of my thought process there. But I am going to get a CNC machine at some point, hopefully soon. And
but isn't that part of the beauty? It's a continuous learning journey. You can always take another step, and that keeps you motivated. It keeps you digging into new sources of information, build relations, and so on.
Yeah.
So
I think having a learning mindset, I attribute so much of my success is just to having a learning mindset and constantly just saying, what more can I learn? If you have that learning mindset, you just never know where it's going to take you.
No, that's right. And your background is very much in the technology side, with the companies you've been at, Libra, Atlassian, and now Snowflake, and previous companies also. Uh, on a very high level, what elements are you looking into when you're thinking design about product? Because even a back-end product, I mean, no one really sees it, and there's not the consumer normally, at least. But what are you looking at on a high level? Where do you start to dig into? And sort of there, if you come into a company, and you know they are not 100, what top 5 things or top 3 things would that's those 3 things that I really would like to start with. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing you want to understand is, at least for myself, is what's the craft look like? How are we actually, is good design happening in the organization? Where is it happening? What are the elements that are supporting that good design happening? Is it happening everywhere? Is it happening in spots? That's the first thing, is where do you think you can start to build from a foundation of good things that are already happening? And it's not just about a product designer that can, or a UX designer. There's a lot of different names we go by. It's how good is the visual design? Do you have content design? What service design elements have you brought to bear? And in many cases, there's a bigger piece of, there's more than just the UI. So what is the experience the customer have when they're not interacting with just a pure UI element? Then there's things like motion design, interaction design. You've got things, design systems to become a much bigger thing in the last few years. So really understanding where the gaps are, what's the skill set of the team. And then I also look at how are they already building? If you go look at the best design groups in the world, they have a very rigorous and positive feedback culture, especially around things like critique and design reviews, and how do you, it's the constant getting the work in front of others, being very, very open and always looking to how you make that work better. And so you look at Apple, they're doing critique. I have lots of friends there that I talk to, and like, how are you guys doing it? They do it every single day. I talk to a lot of the leaders across the industry, and critique and review is something that is woven throughout every great design organization, and Snowflake is no different.
And that really comes not only to the development and design side, but really maybe the 360, or how does that process, when it's really is done well? Is that a 360 process? I mean, there's the sales, there's admin, there's all those things, and they come together, because in the end, many times it's different angles out from the product and product design, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that design can't exist in a vacuum. And I got very technical about the specificity of the design craft. But if you take a step back and you think about all the different disciplines that have to play a part, design can't be successful without really strong partnership with product, with engineering, very strong strategy, and that really starts at the beginning, well before anybody ever puts pixels to a screen. And you need a really strong partnership. And I always believe that great design happens or great products happen when there's a gentle tension between all the disciplines, not in a bad way, but in because everybody brings a different point of view. And if you're able to work with all those different points of view and bring them all together to get the best product, because at the end of the day, everybody wants the best product to be in the customer's hands. But that gentle tension is what I think makes really successful product teams, because everybody does bring a point of view. And this goes back to the idea of diversity and the need to have really diverse teams with diverse points of view. That makes better products.
So if it's okay, let's jump 5 years back that we're sitting right now. I mean, all of our listeners, more or less, people go with cabs. They go with Uber, they go with Lyft, and so on.
Yeah.
And if you reflect back now on that big work you did at that time, what would you have approached it the same way, or what has the last 5 years given you in new experiences on this, and how do you see the competition is going there? Because that was something I was thinking about last time I was there, really looking into how the drivers were handling this and so on.
Yeah,
Is it okay to talk about this?
absolutely. I love talking about Uber. I'm so thankful I had the opportunity to work at Uber, and I that was a moment in time for me where my career really took off, and I learned so much. And I see that as the springboard. If I hadn't had Uber, I wouldn't have been able to learn the skills and build the confidence to go off and do other things that I've been able to do. And that, yeah. So going back to Uber,
Yeah.
I get in, so to your point, yes, I get in every single time I get in a car. I was on the driver's side. So the last big project we did in 2017 was rebuilding the entire driver app from the ground up. That was a really amazing opportunity. And they're still using the same, I'm looking at the maps, I'm looking at the routing, and I'm looking at and how they were learning drivers. So that I'm super proud of that time and in my career and what I learned there. I think when you talk about what are the things that I would do differently, I think a lot of it had to do with just where I sat in the organization and how I could have managed up a little bit more, had better communication. Right, those are some skills I still had to learn how to work with, especially that upper group of executives. And Uber wasn't it's been well documented. I wouldn't call it a warm and fuzzy type culture, but it was a culture that really did respect people, that were action oriented, we all wanted the best thing for the customer. And I think if you could put things, and we were very metrics driven, when it improved the lives of the customer or the drivers, what was the end result from a revenue or from a business metric standpoint as well. So I think that for me, the biggest thing is just how you communicated across the organization and built consensus in a way that wasn't about just jamming it down, on top of people. Is how do you actually influence at a different level? And I think that was one of the skills that I learned at Uber at the end, but it's one of the things I've continued to leverage as I moved on to other opportunities.
And what you're also saying here is, I mean, the work you guys are doing at the development that could have a very direct impact on the revenue side. I mean, clearly fast on the cost side because it's easy to follow. But the revenue dialogues with the excess is super important because that's where you get the funding in the next step.
Absolutely.
So.
And when you think about a business like Uber, that seconds matter, right? Seconds equal dollars. And the quicker you can dispatch a driver to a rider, the quicker you're able to get that person on the road, and they can be earning for the company, and they can get those people to their destinations. And it's really the lifeblood of cities. And so we had to develop a whole new set of ways of getting drivers on the road. How do you get them to say, hey, there's some really great opportunities over here to make money? So there's a lot of different levers we used to get people on there. And all those were very much backed by what's the end result of how do we get people into cars, and how do we increase the amount of revenue that the drivers and the company can make.
But I guess Uber has to be the front runner in this industry, and today there are a fair amount of competition. Do you see is it harder or easier to be a front runner? Because the front runner, he or she, that entity can grab, but others can see, okay, that wasn't that good, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I think Uber was always going to be, or whoever won that scale, that network growth, was going to win that industry. I think that it's now become commoditized, right? I think people have an expectation, and I'm sure there's always opportunity for other companies to chip away, but the thing at Uber was always, how do we just get big fast? How do we get that network effect going really, really big across the world? That was always the intention, because once you do that, you have that, there's such a big base to grow from or build from, that it's very hard once you're in the incumbent, it's very hard to be taken off that throne. And I think Uber, we did move fast. And I think that's what made it so exciting, is we really, at that point in time, we really felt like we were taking on the world. And because they've all had, I was just in Uber. It was such an interesting experience because it was so new for so many people. It was an exciting time.
Yeah, that's great. So let's look back. When you grew up, what has influenced you? What has influenced you to get into the area you are right now?
Yeah, it's I kind of laugh because I think my path was always laid out for me. I just didn't want to take it initially.
Okay.
I grew up, well, what I mean by that is, I grew up in Silicon Valley. My dad was a professional photographer, and he photographed all the high tech computer companies from the 70s all the way to the 90s. And so I was surrounded by, he did things for Apple and Tandem and HP, and we were constantly seeing all this technology and design work. I was very lucky. I grew up around a lot of designers, and that was just part of the world that I grew up with. And the thing I took away from the experience of working with my dad, I was very lucky. My dad was kind enough to bring me into, I got to see shoots, and I got to participate in setting up photography shoots and at points in time. And I saw the care, and we talked about earlier the master of craft with guitars and that nature. And my dad was really a master craftsman. He was an innovator. He was, even though he wasn't an engineer, but he had an engineering mindset. He was able to build really big, huge light sets and figure out how all the lighting was done and come up with new ways of doing things using film. And so I learned it. And so it had to be about preparation. And I learned that piece from my dad. And anyways, I'll go back to that's the craftsman. That's the attention to detail that I still bring to everything I do today. Is the details matter, right? It can't be, you have to be intentional about what you're doing, and you have to plan things out. Going back to I thought it was a hard life growing up as a photographer family. And I mean, we were middle class, but it always felt tenuous. It didn't feel like we were on the up and up all the time and where everything was going great. It was definitely challenging when there were downturns in the economy. So I decided I was going to go to business school, and I was actually thought I was going to be a genetics major. I went to UC Davis, and I was going to get a law degree and open up a genetic law firm. That was my plan. It's like, this is going to be the hot thing in the future. I got really lucky. And looking back, and of course, when I say it was super obvious that I should have done design. I used to sit in my room and I was doing logos. I remember being in fifth grade with pens and drawing logos. And I was really into surf logos and trying to understand 3D lettering and trying to figure all those things out. Anyways, long story short, went to school, realized that genetics wasn't the thing for me. I also didn't want to go to law school because just the idea of sitting across the table from someone that you're just constantly battling someone all day. And that just didn't feel that was going to be a fulfilling thing. And then I got really lucky, and I ended up taking a class, and it was, I'm going to date myself, but it was when Yahoo was still being hosted at Stanford. It was yahoo.stanford.edu. And I got super lucky and took an internet class, or I took a class that they made us build web pages and have email addresses instead of papers. And I remember building my first web page, my first HTML, index.html, and I instantly got it. I was instantly hooked, and I said, oh, I can combine my love of technology and my love of design, and this is the thing. And I've only had a few of those moments in my life where it's just been so clear of what the future was going to be. And that's how I got hooked. So it was like, in the end, it was super, super obvious I should have gone down this design path, but it took me a while I think life had figured it out for me before I actually figured it out for myself.
Oh, that's super interesting. And that is really looking back. And if we move then to the future, what are the trends coming up in design? And of course, that's also a broad question because it could be consumer, et cetera, but I'll give the freedom to you on that, because there has to be trends coming up there or are running right now.
Yeah, there's always trends running. I think probably the most obvious one that we all have top of mind is AI. That seems to be the one that everybody's trying to figure out how do they incorporate AI into their experiences. And for me, one of the reasons why I went to Snowflake is I think that there's a really interesting intersection with data, with AI, with enterprise tools, and an opportunity to build things that haven't necessarily been built before. And going back to the trend, we all walk around with iPhones or a smartphone in our pockets now, and we all have come to have a level of expectation around experiences. And so the consumerization of enterprise that's a trend that's already been happening for a while. I think it's in enterprise, it is harder to move fast, and because you've got a lot of foundations and a lot of legacy built up. But that to me is, how do we make really great experiences that leverage all these super powerful tools that are going to really help companies move forward at a much faster pace? And that is the trend, I think, is we talked about that intersection. That's the thing I'm trying to get into right now, and really try and understand and build a better perspective, because it's all really new for everyone. I don't think that there's very few people that I think are...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This must be really early on this journey. I remember in the old days, I was working for IBM, and it came this new super 390 machines and then whatever you have there. And people would say, well, this is really, on top of it. But, that was very, very in the beginning, and so on. But this sounds as we are still very early on. What is your perception on where technology can do for us in design?
Yeah, we're super early. It's really fascinating to see all the different things that people are creating right now. But we are very, very early, and I think that there's going to be a difference between... We've seen a lot of the generative AI, right? That's very the consumer. And I think that it's very, very different on the enterprise side. We're really trying to figure out how do we make things more efficient for businesses. And I think that there's a ton of opportunity there, but we're still just trying to apply the things we're seeing on a daily basis of how do we, at least from a Snowflake perspective, how do we make things more efficient right now? How do we get your data into, or how do we pull data from different places? Be it from a text, a printed text document that you may have. This is unstructured data. Yeah. How do we use tools to get those things in so that it becomes a structured data that we can actually derive insights from it? So that's just one example. But I think that it's changing so rapidly that it's really trying to it's trying to understand what people's intention is with our tools, and then how do we use the existing tools we've got with AI to make those more efficient right now. I think that there's going to be lots of discoveries along the way, but part of this is just, the iterative nature of kind of coming to an opinion about how these tools are going to be showing up later on.
Yeah, it's interesting. So let's talk a little bit about leadership. You've been a leader now for probably quite many years in different positions. So if you reflect back, what has been some of your biggest challenges during this time where, if it's been first time entering things, or, where it's been tough being a leader?
Yeah.
Have you had any situations like that?
Yeah, I think that, whenever I talk to folks that are interested in design leadership, one of the things I always tell them is the higher up you go, the lonelier it gets. And the interesting thing about being a design leader is you're oftentimes just surrounded by product and engineering, especially when you get to that the high level. You're usually surrounded. You're the only design leader in the room. And for me, what I realized over time was I was just trying to keep up, and I wasn't bringing the value that design can really bring, which is an alternative opinion many times of ways of and thinking through and asking questions so we can really derive a better understanding. And so I really started to build that part of my leadership, which is being less afraid to ask questions that might, at the time, I thought were, they must be super obvious to everybody else. And they oftentimes weren't. And it was one of those things where if you can ask the right questions, you can spur a lot of conversation that wouldn't have occurred if you had not been in the room. So I think that was just one of the biggest things, is just getting comfortable in understanding where design really plays a big role, especially at that leadership level.
But it is actually one of the most important areas for a leader, that is asking questions, because the answers are many times in the organization, at least in somebody's head, or pieces of it where you can gather it together, and it does give something else also. It looks you care by doing that, and people say, well, you don't know everything, and then suddenly you get a strengthened team out of it also.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's only for design. That's actually for really any leadership role as such.
Yeah, leadership is it's tough. It's when you see it done really, really well. And I've been lucky enough to be around some amazing leaders over the course of my career, and I've learned so much from them. And I always try to give back because they were so gracious with their time, and many times when they didn't have to be. And it was just out of the idea of just trying to make me better. And so I try to return that. It's a hard job. It's a hard, there's a lot of learning, a lot of bumps along the way. And there are a lot of moments of self-reflection and even asking yourself, can I do this? Am I cut out for this? And you have to be resilient. You have to be resilient for yourself. You have to be resilient for your team. I think that going back to, we talked about Uber a little while ago. I learned a lot about being resilient at Uber. And I think probably in the last few years, more people have had the opportunity to what I'd consider, leading through. There's peacetime, there's wartime. I got a lot of wartime at Uber, especially some of the Delete Uber campaigns, and when it felt like the world was really aligned against us. And there was a lot of cultural challenges going on at Uber, was with the CEO changeover, and learning to be resilient, and also learning how to compartmentalize that so you can be there for your team. Because at the end of the day, you can't be a great leader unless you really support your team and you're there for the people. That is probably the most important thing of all, is making sure you're building strong teams.
And how do you do that? Or what are, nowadays I guess it's a little bit backbone, but look into it. What are the components?
Well, I think that being honest with oneself, understanding where there's your strengths and your weaknesses, and then being able to fill in your areas where you're not weak. And that means getting people that are better than yourself, especially in those types of areas where they really excel. I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing, and I learned a lot by watching other design leaders, some good, some bad, but what I learned from the ones that I want to be, I got into this role, I got into this industry because I love doing the work, and I love the teamwork and building things with other people that are like-minded and just as excited about doing the best work possible as I am. And so being able to feel like you know everybody on your team and you have a good sense of how people are feeling. And that means taking the time, having one-on-ones. It doesn't matter where people sit in the organization. You want to be able to have that kind of relationship with anybody. I think that's the piece that starts to feel like, when people feel like they know their leaders, that starts to build the foundations of a team. If people don't trust their leaders, then you've already lost the ship, so to speak.
And that's also the beauty of having smaller entities, teams. Also, when younger, we'll have smaller entities, and suddenly, if it grows really big, and as you said, you're getting on the top. It is a lot more lonesome, because even though you have the connection there, you also have to take a number of decisions, and people may not even know where the decision actually comes from. So there are those things that you cannot discuss really with anyone because it's your decision. But when you're in these smaller teams, there's so much beauty into it. So, as a final remark here on this great dialogue, having new guys and girls coming in into the product design and wanting to make a career in that, what advices would you give them, looking back and for today?
So many, but I'll pull out a few key ones that I always think about. The first is get really good at your craft. Really good at your craft. Spend the time, the years it takes to get really good at it, because that will not be investment wasted. Too often I see or hear from, I chat with designers, and I had a conversation not too long ago where they'd been in the industry for a year and a half, and they were already saying, I'm just trying to decide if I go into management. And my response is, no, take 10 years and get really, really good at what you do, because if you get really good at what you do, you can do anything after that. Don't worry about the management. I think that's my first piece of advice. I think the second piece is don't be afraid of making mistakes, especially if you're just starting out. Take huge chances. Put yourself in a place where you have the opportunity to learn the most. I think I've learned probably the most by my own failures, and that happened a lot through my first 10 years of my career than the success. I think success is easy for us to look at and say, oh, well, that just happened. But you don't know why sometimes. With failures, you're able to really reflect and say, well, why did that actually happen? I can see what the path was that I made, what mistakes I made along the way to end in that result. So I think being unafraid of that and just take lots of chances. If there's one regret I have from my earliest days in the industry is that I didn't swing for the fences enough. I think I was probably too cautious. And you only have that opportunity when you're young. You have no family, you've got really no obligations. And what's the worst that happens? You might end up going home and living on your parents' couch for 6 months as you try to get yourself back on your feet. But that's the worst that can happen. And so really taking advantage of that now, because you're going to learn so much through those experiences that it's going to be invaluable for the rest of your career.
Those are very, very valuable insights. And I'm super excited following you, what's going to happen now in your new task here, and see how that develops. So thank you so much, Zack, having you on Growth Leaders, and thank you for today.
Thanks, Peter. I really had a great time. It's great talking to you.
Thanks.